So, for example, in 2008, Trump sold a property in Florida for, I think it was $80 or $90 million when it was only worth 40 million. He sold it to a Russian oligarch. It got him out of a situation where he was facing one of his many bankruptcies. And Trump was reported to have said at the time to his aides, actually, Putin got me off here. I owe him.
Is Donald Trump a Russian asset?
No pressure. I think he is a Russian asset. It's a question of how you define it. So you can actually be an asset without being consciously an asset, of course. And you can obviously be an asset with being consciously cooperating with a foreign power. But I think if you actually look at Trump's behavior and policies over both periods he's been in office, there's probably only been one consistent theme, and that's that he gives Vladimir Putin a soft time. And I think that's pretty fundamental, because if you look at Trump's relationships with almost anybody else, including his own government, remember what he used to say about Marco Rubio, what J.D. Vance and all the others, is that everything he does seems to benefit Putin, either consciously or unconsciously. And of course, you've seen in this crisis in the Middle East that one of the things the American government's done is it's lifted its sanctions to some extent on Russian oil exports, which are fundamental for funding the war in Ukraine, to the tune of maybe $200 million a day of extra income for the Russian state. So I think there is a consistency here. The consistency is that Trump is Putin's greatest asset in the world. I think possibly is the only thing that's standing between him and defeat in Ukraine.
Forgive me if I push you, it's kind of what I do. What you've said amounts to circumstantial evidence. He does this, he does that. You dug into this in some detail. So I'm going to say, beyond what it merely looks like, which any of us could probably go, well, yeah, he probably helps Putin. But is he an asset in the more technical term? Is he, in some sense, owned by the Russians? I mean, just help us with that as far as you know, because you have looked at this.
Yeah. So I think there are two ways in which the Russian intelligence services apply pressure. And they also, of course, feed ego. And I think Trump's narcissistic personality is a classic attractive recruitment profile for an intelligence service. And the way in which they relate to him, of course, is that money, fundamentally, and resources, and behavior, compromising behavior, sexual behavior, whatever. And I think it is instructive looking back, both to what we've reported and what other people have reported. So, for example, in 2008, Trump sold a property in Florida for, I think it was $80 or $90 million when it was only worth 40 million. He sold it to a Russian oligarch. It got him out of a situation where he was facing one of his many bankruptcies. And Trump was reported to have said at the time to his aides, actually, Putin got me off here. I owe him. And also, he told actually Michael Cohen, who is controversially one of his henchmen, at the time, that he owed that to Putin. So my view is that at least from 2008, Putin had undue influence and pressure on Trump.
All right, for those not in the intelligence community, that would mean, quite literally in some way, he gets instructions from Russia?
I think we've got to be slightly more sophisticated that we look at assets. So I would say, let's talk about agents, okay? So when you have an intelligence agent, that agent can be a clandestine agent who's stealing the nuclear secrets and selling them to a foreign power. That agent can be an influence agent, maybe somebody even in the media, for example, who's been recruited, who's pushing, or politics for that matter, pushing a pro-Russian line, a pro-Russian agenda. Or it can be somebody who's facilitating operations, money laundering, providing properties, other things, contacts, introductions. My view is that you have to look at this Trump relationship with Russia through the prism of those three things, and to think that they have probably progressed from one to the other. Initially, probably facilitating the laundering of Russian money through the property empire, and moving on to other things later, because let's not forget that Trump wasn't really active in politics at that time. But what we do know is that the Russian intelligence services are very interested in leading businessmen. They're very interested in public figures who they try and recruit in this way to pursue their own agenda. And of course, we've seen it in this country with the conviction of Nathan Gill, who, as you're aware, was the leader of Reform UK in Wales, who was actually pleaded guilty recently and was imprisoned for 10 years for being a paid Russian agent of influence.
Yeah, he actually had accounts that showed money went
exactly. But he wasn't a clandestine spy. He wasn't the person giving the Russians the nuclear secrets. And I think you have to look at Trump in that same way. He's never been somebody, at least to my knowledge, who's been handing over state secrets. But he has tremendous influence, and he facilitated a lot of Russian money laundering and other things that went on.
Is he getting paid by Russia?
Not into a Swiss bank account. I wouldn't imagine he'd be so stupid. But I think clearly, as I illustrated in the case of the house in Florida in 2008, clearly money has changed hands.
If I were Vladimir Putin and I looked at that and what you say is true, I might think that, yes, he has been useful up to a point, but there is still a Ukraine war going on. There is still US support for the Ukrainians. There are sanctions, not as many as there were, as you pointed out. I mean, he isn't coming up to the mark, is he?
Well, probably true in many spheres, but not through a lack of intent, incidentally. No, I think when you look at the Ukraine war, the really stunning thing in the last 18 months has been the way in which the US government has shifted from being supportive of Zelensky in Ukraine now to being pretty actively supportive of Putin and Russia. And we can go into that, why they want to sort of take Ukraine out of the equation so they can build up their bilateral relationship again with Russia. The reality is that at the present time, in my understanding of the situation, the US government at the very highest levels is actively trying to undermine and weaken Zelensky so that he will either be pushed out of office or that he will cede the Donbass territories to Putin and thus effectively hand Putin a victory in the war, or at least one that he might be able to sell to his people back home, which he certainly can't at the moment.
Iran is a Russian ally, has supplied Russia with drones. They wouldn't have been terribly pleased when Trump launched his latest war on Iran, would they?
No, they wouldn't. But of course, Russia also has a very curious relationship with Israel. And in particular, I would argue, because of the large Russian Jewish emigre community in Israel, some of whom are in politics, of course, like Lieberman is one case in point. But beyond that, you know, the relationship between Netanyahu and Putin is a very curious one, and one that I think, you know, would merit a closer attention. So I think that it's not a binary situation where Russia is the ally of Iran and the enemy of Israel. That's not true. I'm sure that Russia's suffered some setbacks in Iran, but there's an upside to this as well. The upside is that Russian oil is now being traded at a greater price, and Putin's absolute obsession and absolute priority geopolitically is to beat Ukraine and to suppress Ukraine. And anything that helps in that is not an altogether bad thing.
We are in an interesting world, aren't we? Because we saw China host Trump, and then China host Putin. And some suggestion was these are the three players in the world, the rest of us, well, we're also Rands. And yet, from what you say, I mean, we know that Putin is to some extent a client of China at the moment in many ways, and the other visitor possibly also. I mean, that's a very interesting perspective on power relations in the modern world, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that the main beneficiary of Trump version 2, if you want to call it that, will be China. It won't actually be Russia in the end, it will be China. Russia is a declining power in many ways. It's a very weak country and it could begin to disintegrate if this war continues in the same direction it has. China, on the other hand, is a rising power. You know, it has a very powerful economy, it has a very powerful military now, although untested, which is quite important. And I think that what's happened there is that Xi will play Trump. He will know how to handle him, he will know how to flatter him, but steadily, gradually, slowly by slowly, China's influence in the world, and particularly in the global south, as we call it, will grow. And China will be able to con a lot of the world that it's the force for stability, it's the predictable power, It's the one that's in favour of the international order, not the United States. And this is where Trump 2 is such a disaster, not just for the United States, but to any Western democracy and ally of the country, because basically Trump is scragging its whole reputation, its soft power, and its influence in the world.
We've talked about the situation with Trump and what he is in some detail and how that affects the world. Before we go on to the main subject of this intelligence, New World Order, on a human level, you were someone who worked in the shadows, obviously. And 2016, you were right at the centre of an international furore. I think I was working at the time and trying to track you down at one point to interview. It didn't happen. What was that
Better
like?
late than never.
Well, quite. What was it like? Did you feel that you'd been hung out to dry? Because the Democrats used what you had, the company that had hired you. All this was going on. Were you hung out to dry?
I don't think we were hung out to dry. I think we found ourselves, obviously, in the sort of front line of a storm. Essentially, we went out to do this job, which was to gather intelligence on what the Russians were doing in the American election in 2016, whether they had relationships with the Trump campaign and Trump himself. And we expected to find, possibly the odd dodgy financial deal or whatever, investment or discussion. We didn't expect to find what we did, which was our sources came back and said they are intervening very strongly in the 2016 election and they are colluding with members of the Trump campaign team. We knew as intelligence officers, as soon as that intelligence landed, it was actually the very first report the project produced from sources inside Russia, that we were sitting on a time bomb. And the question for us was how we were going to handle that and whether it was going to leak, who we should share it with. We initially had a commercial client. That client was linked to the Hillary Clinton campaign. But right from the outset, we knew as good allies of the United States that it was our duty to report that intelligence in to the FBI in that case, within a week or two of us obtaining it, and to continue doing that throughout the election campaign until the Comey speech about reopening the Hillary Clinton emails investigation happened, which completely derailed all that. But ultimately it was leaked, the dossier, after the election by somebody who should have known better, who we trusted, who was working at the time for John McCain. And we have been literally in litigation ever since because of that act. So yes, it was the most bizarre exposure. We went from being unknown to on the front page of every newspaper in the world in a week.
Where did you go? Did you hide?
Well, me and my family, because obviously they're a big factor in all this, the disruption to them. We didn't go to hide. We went and stayed with other people. We didn't want. We had a whole army of media trucks parked on the sort of outside the front gate, and every part of our past was dug up and put through the mill and everything else. It was a horrible experience, but it was like a nuclear bomb going off. But gradually and slowly, we built back up. We defended ourselves in court. We opened our channels again to the media, and then I ended up by writing a book. So we've sort of come full circle again.
Donald Trump has a record of pursuing with some vitriol people who have in some sense offended him, as various people, not least I think the former head of the FBI and all kinds of others have discovered. Have you had any problems in that department? Has he come for you?
Yeah, we've had all sorts of issues from pressure from...
Can you travel to America?
No. I did go there actually to launch the book.
Oh, right. You made it back.
In 2024, but that was before Trump came back to office. And I've been warned not to go there at the moment, which of course for me is very hard as somebody who was an incredibly close ally of the United States for decades, who has American family and relations, who has great business contacts and friendships there, a lot of which is still going on, of course. I still get a lot of communications. I've become a sort of agony aunt for my American colleagues who phone me on a regular basis, usually at 10 o'clock at night, 5 o'clock Eastern time there. Oh no, not another one. And I end up, they're almost suicidal about what's going on in America, and particularly what's going on in the intelligence and national security community in America, where, they've changed sides. I was saying earlier that one of my ex-CIA colleagues came over here, very sort of level-headed, expert on China, sat down in my office last summer and said, "Chris, my country is becoming a fascist country." And I said, am I really hearing this from you? And he said, yes, you are. He said, with ICE out there, he said he's got a mixed race marriage and his children are mixed race. He won't let his children out. He lives in Florida. He won't let them out now to public parks and so on and so forth, in case they're swept up by ICE, shoved in a van and taken off. And that is absolutely what's going on and what's feared to be going on in the States at the moment. So, we're not in a normal situation. We still have a lot of good professionals there in the intelligence services, in the national security community, but they're having a terrible battle to maintain their position. And for example, it's led to a situation where the FBI is no longer meaningfully working on Russia as a threat and as an adversary of the United States, which is absolutely extraordinary and stunning. But that's where we've got to.
So that really kind of brings us to the subject on the headline for our discussion, which is where intelligence goes. Because if your former employees, MI6, SIS, know that that is the state of the CIA, intelligence sharing, which is a very big part of it, Five Eyes, all kinds of stuff, does that fall apart? Does that fall down by the wayside?
It doesn't fall apart because not least it's absolutely kind of...
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.